An in-depth look at the people and events that shape our community. This is Iowa in Focus.
This week we speak with Planned Parenthood to see what it takes to go to work the day after seeing what happened to their coworkers in Colorado. And Jeb Bush joins us, talking about separating himself from his last name and how he would handle Vladimir Putin the right way. Welcome to Iowa in Focus. We're taking the time each week to give you the context behind what's happening out on the 2016 campaign trail and in the news. And that process starts with the barnstorm. Texas Senator Ted Cruz wasted no time after the Thanksgiving weekend making his way to Coralville on Monday. He told the crowd that the United States is in crisis and that candidates should be debating the best way to make sure their children's generation isn't the first one to not have a better life than their parents did. With the attacks in Paris still fresh in the headlines, Cruz pushed through his idea of peace through strength, paying homage to Ronald Reagan and, like many other candidates, blaming President Obama for falling short and not taking the correct route to accepting Syrian refugees.
And I hope that President Obama and Hillary Clinton stop their extreme partisan position of being willing to risk the safety of innocent men and women in this country because of their political refusal to even acknowledge radical Islamic terrorism, much less do anything serious to stop it.
Fellow Republican Jeb Bush had a similar message when he came through Dubuque and Waterloo. He says the United States and Russia might be in a position to work together if the U.S. had a stronger leadership role in the world. Instead, Bush says President Obama has been weak, letting Russia and Vladimir Putin do whatever they want.
They're not attacking ISIS. They're propping up the Assad regime, and that's their intention. They want to have a military presence in Syria, which they've strengthened now because of our lack of leadership, and they want to be back in the game in the Middle East. They want to be a player, and they're achieving their objective while we pull back.
Coming up later on in Iowa in Focus, see our sit-down interview with Jeb Bush, where we dig into how a Bush White House would be different than what President Obama has done so far. Another big event that candidates are addressing out on the trail is the Planned Parenthood shooting last week. It all digs up at least two different and pretty important issues that candidates have been talking about already: legal access to abortions and gun control. This week, we take a look at what it's like for Planned Parenthood employees to keep going to work knowing the risk they're taking.
Most people who work for Planned Parenthood are very mission-driven. We feel that our work is really, really important. We want to help people and educate them and empower them, and we are more committed than ever to continuing our mission and being there for the people who depend upon us.
But over the past few months, that mission has been harder than before. It started most recently over the summer when an anti-abortion group released heavily edited videos that said they were of meetings with Planned Parenthood employees talking about the best ways to perform abortions so different parts of the baby's bodies could be used in other ways. The Republican presidential candidates were already pro-life and against the work that Planned Parenthood does. The videos only reaffirmed those positions.
This is ridiculous. I mean, Planned Parenthood's actions were barbaric. We see this video where they're taking our taxpayer dollars, taking babies, ripping apart their bodies, selling their organs across the country.
That callous attitude and sort of not even acknowledging what she's talking about as a baby that she's harvesting parts from and selling, I think it's horrific.
We cancel their contract in Louisiana. We're working to make sure they don't get any taxpayer funding in Louisiana. We've cut them out of Medicaid.
About a month later, a federal court prevented Jindal from withholding Medicaid funding, but the message was clear. Because so many people disagree with the Supreme Court decision allowing legal access to abortions, employees at Planned Parenthood say they've seen plenty of demonstrators and received plenty of angry phone calls and hate mail. But then there was the shooting at a Planned Parenthood facility in Colorado Springs, killing 3 people and hurting a handful of others.
Well, there were a range of emotions shared by our staff, ranging from sadness, grief, anger, shock, numbness. But we've seen an outpouring of support from people who do value our work and our mission, and so that's been really neat.
The reaction from the GOP that was so critical of Planned Parenthood was measured and focused much more on the action of the man that candidates called deranged than the subject of his rampage.
This was a despicable homicide. This was an individual who's deranged. And I will say it's unfortunate to see so many folks in the press bending over backwards to try to use this horrible crime to advance a political agenda.
Bush agreed, even after all that time spent by candidates talking about defunding Planned Parenthood and calling them barbaric.
No, I don't blame the candidates. I think people have been within the realm of decency on this. Look, Planned Parenthood was caught selling body parts of aborted babies. It's a pretty, if you're talking about inciting activity, that's a pretty horrible thing.
But Dr. Meadows says people who protest Planned Parenthood have a difficult time putting themselves in someone else's shoes, and that it's knowing that she's needed that gets her to work even after seeing the horrors in Colorado Springs unfold, because she says her job is even more important in the face of danger.
I personally find being an abortion provider to be very meaningful. Because not everybody's willing to do that, to subject themselves to potential threats or even risk to their lives and personal well-being. So it definitely makes me proud to be an abortion provider.
That was a tough interview for Dr. Meadows to do, and Planned Parenthood was very careful about speaking at all, and they were adamant about not making any comments about politics or politicians. What they definitely are doing, though, is continuing their work. Every week we'll be going inside Iowa politics, talking about the people not trying to move into the White House. Voters in the corridor have a better idea who might be replacing former Speaker of the House Craig Paulson. Former Cedar Rapids news anchor Ashley Hinson announced that she's going to be running for his seat after resigning from her anchoring position a few weeks ago. She told voters on her new Facebook page that she has many goals, first and foremost, to treat everyone with respect and be responsible with your resources. World leaders are hard at work trying to bring together a historic agreement to slow climate change. CBS 2 News reporter Steffi Lee explains how University of Iowa students will be there to learn even more.
World leaders hope what happens in Paris at COP21 will change the future of the planet.
Food insecurity, clean water, that all has effects on your health, on your ability to live, actually.
Human rights researcher Andrea Cohen will be with 3 other University of Iowa students as nations explore options for energy outside of fossil fuels. The United States, along with China, pledged to cut emissions. In Iowa, the push for ethanol comes to mind.
I'm torn because on the one hand, there's the idea that any industry like that employs people.
For journalism graduate student Casey McGinnis,
definitely water quality is a big one, and when it comes to soil erosion.
He says it's relevant as Iowa continues to face a huge nitrate fight.
Buffer strips are one specific example of kind of like an agricultural practice that I think is fairly easy for farmers to implement that can kind of have a pretty big difference in terms of getting fewer of those nitrates.
But Kelsey McGinnis says the arts also play a role in what's at stake.
We have more access to digital music than we ever have.
She says an increased dependence on technology fosters a culture where many are detached from their surroundings.
I can walk around with my iPhone and my headphones in and just sort of take my music with me wherever I go.
All 4 hope to bring home a personal touch.
I think human rights puts climate change directly on the individual rather than on government.
Coming up next, we sit down with Jeb Bush, see why he says he fits into the year of the outsider candidate, even though he's related to 2 former presidents. This week, we caught up with Jeb Bush while he was in Dubuque, and we started off by asking him about the craziness that's been the 2016 election cycle so far. How do you think that 2016 has gone so far for the way that you're built as a candidate and that your campaign is built to handle everything that's been going on this year?
Yeah, no one would have predicted 2015 would have had this volatility for sure. But we have a strategy, just focus on slow, steady progress. Here in Iowa, what really matters is organization, and we're focused on it like a laser beam.
Is there a desire, though, or to correct some of the things that are said that are inflammatory? So, probably the one time we'll bring up Donald Trump today, but some of the things that Donald Trump says or Ben Carson says that are totally out of left field, specifically about 9/11, especially because that's tied to your brother. Is there a desire to kind of correct the record there and lash out against those things and kind of lead almost and say, well, now you've gone too far?
He's gone too far, and he's showing a lack of seriousness as being capable of being president. And that's the bigger issue is elections are about the future, not the past. But past is prologue. If you say the things you say, if you take all the incoming without a filter and you just regurgitate it back out, it doesn't show a seriousness in serious times. And so I do post up against this notion that candidates that just say things they know are not accurate aren't qualified, because this is a serious job. You're being commander-in-chief of the greatest military force in the world. You're going to send men and women in harm's way. You better do it with a sobriety that accompanies that office.
Under the Syrian refugee crisis, you said a few weeks ago about maybe taking in refugees that are Christian or prove that they're Christian. Is there a danger in creating a dangerous kind of other class where you ostracize people who are, just because of their religion, who are looking for a safer place to live?
Well, first of all, the interesting thing is that the screening process in the law for how that's to take place requires a religious test. So what I was suggesting is done each and every day. It is not discriminating against Muslims to suggest that Christians have no place to go. A Christian can't go to a refugee camp full of Muslims. It's not safe. A Christian will be beheaded based on their faith. A Christian will be enslaved, or a Yazidi. Religious minorities in the Middle East have no place to go. And I think we're duty bound to recognize that and show some compassion for people, but for their faith, could live a productive life. But because they're Christians, they're being slaughtered. That's not to say that the United States doesn't have a role to play to provide support for innocent refugees that are Muslim. But I think the best way to do that is to create safe zones in Syria. Ultimately, people don't want to leave be uprooted. They want to stay in their communities, but they need to do so in a safe and secure way.
How does this kind of particular subject balance the idea of keeping the United States safe with the idea of being a melting pot and welcoming people in, if they do want to come here, or working with them within the Middle East?
Well, we have this unique case of where Islamic terrorists have realized that there is a vulnerability. Our freedom is our vulnerability, and they attack it in all sorts of ways. They attack it through the internet. They attack it because of freedom of movement, and they attack it in the case of Europe, with embedding in large numbers of refugees that are migrating to France and other countries. And so we have to be vigilant. It's not nothing is either or. It's always a balance. And I think we can protect our freedoms and protect our immigrant heritage by making sure that legal immigration is protected, but illegal immigration and clearly threats of terror have to be dealt with in a completely different way.
Do you think the GOP discussion on topics like this, whether it was immigration from the South before this or immigration from Syria now in the Middle East, has moved to a point that's bordering on xenophobic, if in some cases it's not already there?
For most of the candidates, no. I think most of the candidates have a reasonable view, but Trump is preying on people's anger and fear without a solution. He's not a serious candidate in that regard. He doesn't offer serious proposals. He knows exactly what he's doing. And frankly, he's playing the press like a Stradivarius violin. I mean, he totally gets how the press, by saying the outrageous thing, the press will cover him more, and this is where he gets his energy. The net effect, though, is that there's no solving of a problem. And we have to solve how we control our border, and we have to deal with the Syrian refugee crisis in a proper way.
Is this a chance to partner with Vladimir Putin? And is this a way that maybe we can find a way, if not common ground and a little bit of trust, to bring those two kind of old superpowers together?
It could be if the United States led, but from our position of weakness, Russia senses a weakness and is exploiting their own national interest in a very direct and open way, and quite effectively, I think. So we need to lead and be stronger. And secondly, Russia would have to abandon the Assad regime for this to be effective. They would have to be part of a solution to take Assad out. And the remnants of the Syrian Free Army, some version of that with the support of the Arab League, with Europe, and led by the United States, with Russia as a partner theoretically, could work, but that's not Russia's interest. You look at the number of sorties that Russia is doing. They're not attacking ISIS. They're propping up the Assad regime, and that's their intention. They want to have a military presence in Syria, which they've strengthened now because of our lack of leadership, And they want to be back in the game in the Middle East. They want to be a player, and they're achieving their objective while we pull back.
Coming up after the break, why thinking of 9/11 or now Paris when you think of terrorism misses part of the story, the history of domestic terrorism right here in the United States. Welcome back. This is The Real Story, where we're going to take the time to give context to some of the events that go on during the 2016 race for the White House. Sometimes we'll have to go back a few days, weeks, or months, or sometimes years to find the events that are still relevant. As we find out today, foreigners are hardly the only people to be violent against the American homeland. Ask most Americans to name a terrorist attack, chances are they're going to think of 9/11 first. Attacks like that one have been carried out by foreigners, and the 9/11 hijackers, most of them were from Saudi Arabia, but also from Egypt, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates. Fast forward 15 years to today, and the United States and the rest of the world is facing a similar threat from the same region, but the terrorists are no longer connected with al-Qaeda. Now it's ISIS.
ISIS seems willing to go to basically any soft target where people are. And so defending against al-Qaeda meant protect symbolic targets, protect transportation hubs, but that gave security services something to focus on. And with ISIS, they seem willing to basically hit anywhere, and that becomes very difficult to stop because that would require such a police state that people wouldn't actually want to live under. That would be even worse.
But when Americans see the footage of the Colorado Planned Parenthood shooting, the carnage is bad, but the difference now is the perpetrator. The suspect is an American, Robert Deere. We don't know much about him quite yet, but at the very least, he's the latest in a long line of terrorists already born within the United States borders.
Unfortunately, it wasn't very surprising to me personally, just given the environment we live in and the violent society we currently live in.
But let's take a walk through history. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski terrorized Americans by mailing and setting bombs periodically, earning himself the nickname the Unabomber. Over that span, he killed 3 people and injured 23 more. But his power came from the fact that he used the Postal Service to deliver many of his bombs. And no one knew if they would be the next unsuspecting victim. That kind of influence eventually partially convinced the New York Times and Washington Post to publish his manifesto, which ironically led to his brother recognizing his writing and contacting the authorities. Right before the Unabomber was arrested, though, Timothy McVeigh carried out the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. That killed 168 people and was the deadliest act of homegrown terror in U.S. history. It also killed 19 children. McVeigh was a Desert Storm vet and was driven to violence in the United States after seeing his federal government kill its own people in standoffs in Idaho and Texas. Jim Denny's children were both hurt during that explosion. CBS News spoke with him the night it happened and again 20 years later.
You've seen the building.
I've seen the building. Let's lift it.
It's a miracle you have your children today.
It's an absolute miracle.
It's with us every hour of every day, and we see it and live it.
One of the most recent attacks now, besides the shooting at Planned Parenthood, was a shooting at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. Dylan Roof is accused of shooting and killing 9 people in a historically black church during a prayer meeting. Authorities have said that the shooting was racially motivated, and Roof has pleaded not guilty, and he's due to have his trial next summer.
We must find it in our heart at some point in time, not only to help those that are victims, but to also help his family as well.
And just this past week, roughly 15 people were killed and a few more were wounded when gunmen opened fire at a holiday party in San Bernardino, California. Police say Tashfeen Malik and Saeed Farouk opened fire on that party at a social services center for disabled people Wednesday. Family members say the 2 attackers were married, and law enforcement officials say Farouk worked as an environmental specialist at the county's public health department. So as we learn more about what happened in San Bernardino, we'll find out if this falls into the same category as the Charleston shooting and the Colorado Springs shooting. The one thing that's clear, though, is that the threat from terrorism doesn't exclusively come from overseas. Coming up next, hear all about the small rural high school who's had multiple presidential candidates stop by, and they're not even done yet. Welcome back. We'll close the show each week taking a look at what happened on social media. The middle of this week saw another deadly mass shooting, this one in San Bernardino, California. Harold writes on our Facebook page that it's time to live like they do in Australia, otherwise this will never cease. And Australia has very strict gun laws. So Stephanie replied to Harold's comment saying that she has a friend who lives in Australia and that their murder rate has gone up since taking away their guns. People like to use machetes, bats, knives, homemade bombs, anything. Be informed before you speak. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. Just a taste of some of the conversation going on our Facebook page. Now we take a look at their voice. That's what the candidates and their campaigns are posting on social media. We're also looking at what the candidates are saying about the shooting in San Bernardino. As the story was unfolding, Donald Trump tweeted out, "California shooting looking very bad. Good luck to law enforcement and God bless. This is when our police are so appreciated." Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton quoted a New York Times tweet about the breaking news and said, "I refuse to accept this as normal. We must take action to stop gun violence now." And she signed it with an H. Ted Cruz said, "Our prayers are with the victims, their families, and first responders in San Bernardino who willingly go into harm's way to save others." And Bernie Sanders said mass shootings are becoming an almost everyday occurrence in this country. This sickening and senseless gun violence must stop. You can follow along on Twitter and Facebook all week long. See our interviews as we do them. Chime in with what you think and send us your favorite pictures. We'll upload full shows and a lot of our features to the website as well in the Iowa in Focus section. Every week we end with the week ahead, a chance to see what the different campaigns have scheduled and see what they're up to. Later on today, Rick Santorum will be in Mason City and ends the night in Spirit Lake. Monday, Carly Fiorina is at a presidential tech town hall talking about the future of technology in the United States. And then Tuesday, Martin O'Malley goes to Keota High School. That is a very small rural school that has been reaching out to a bunch of presidential candidates to come visit and has had pretty good success getting them to come. So be sure to come back next week to get the clear facts right here on Iowa in Focus.